This House now resumes its sitting. Good afternoon, everyone. I call upon the Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill be read a second time. As part of its ongoing legislative reform, Madam Speaker, the government is prioritizing amendments to the Merchant Shipping Act 2001 and related regulations to align with international maritime standards, particularly the International Maritime Organization's III Code. So I'm pleased that this bill, the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill, is getting its second reading in the House today. Madam Speaker, the Virgin Islands is committed to upholding the highest standards in maritime safety, security, and environmental protection. These legislative reforms will not only ensure our compliance with international obligations, but also reinforce our ability to effectively regulate, enforce, and support the global maritime industry. Strengthening our legal framework demonstrates our commitment to responsible flag state administration and enhances our position as a premier maritime jurisdiction. The proposed amendments, Madam Speaker, serve four primary purposes: addressing legislative gaps identified in the III Code audit. These amendments seek to clarify and update the enactment of mandatory international conventions, international law. In particular, this bill facilitates the enactment of new merchant shipping regulations, safety of life at sea, replacing an existing patchwork of adopted UK regulations, implementing the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLAS, 1974, as amended. This will ensure Virgin Islands legislation effectively implements current IMO safety standards. The amendments explicitly grant the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force jurisdiction to investigate offenses under the Act, as well as investigatory powers for all criminal offenses on Virgin Islands flagged ships in circumstances where the courts of the Virgin Islands have prosecutorial authority. This will ensure that maritime crimes can be effectively investigated and prosecuted. The bill will increase the registry's global competitiveness, expanding the list of eligible ship owners in line with recent UK amendments, enabling persons and companies from Commonwealth nations to register Virgin Island ships. In addition, the amendment reinstates countries previously able to register by reference to the recognized jurisdictions list, which was appealed in 2022. The bill will remove the requirement to consult the UK Secretary of State before enacting local maritime regulations, streamlining the legislative process for more efficient administration. The Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill contains provisions to update the list of qualifying persons for owning a Virgin Island ship, enhance the implementation of the Safety Convention in the Virgin Islands, and to give effect to regional and other codes of practice relating to the safety of ships, to provide for maritime enforcement powers in respect of criminal investigations or offenses on ships, and for connected purposes. Turning to the objects and reasons of the bill, Madam Speaker, it contains 30 clauses. Clauses 1 through 8, Madam Speaker. Clause 1 sets out the short title of the bill, while Clause 2 amends Section 4 of the Principal Act to update and expand the persons qualified to own a Virgin Island ship. It reestablishes the qualification of United Kingdom bodies corporate to be owners of Virgin Island ships and extends qualification to citizens and bodies corporate in a Commonwealth jurisdiction and to the jurisdictions listed in Schedule 7. Clauses 3 to 23 amend Part 7 of the Act to facilitate enactment of new merchant shipping, safety of life at sea regulations. The SOLAS regulations, which are intended to come into effect immediately following the commencement of this bill, provide for ships sailing on international voyages. The following provisions remove duplicate provision in the Act and restrict application of the remaining powers to ships which sail on non-international voyages. Clause 3 repeals certain definitions in Section 171, which are better placed in the regulations. Clause 4 inserts a now Section 172A, applying the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, 1974. Its protocols, annexes, and codes to the Virgin Islands. It provides a power for the governor to make regulations for the purpose of implementing SOLAS into domestic law, identifies the types of matters for which regulations may be made, and stipulates the permissible criminal penalties and fines in such regulations. Clause 5 amends Section 173 by deleting subsection 1A, which previously made provision for application of SOLAS, now addressed by insertion of 172A. It also clarifies that the reference in subsection 6 to the Merchant Shipping, Passenger Ship Construction and Surveyor Regulations 1998 is a reference to the United Kingdom regulations with that title. Clause 6 inserts a new section, 173B, that empowers the governor to implement or give effect to any maritime code by way of regulations and stipulates the criminal penalties such regulations may impose. Clause 7 amends Section 174 to provide that the persons who should receive notices of ship-to-ship transfers will be designated in regulations instead of by the minister. Clause 8 repeals Section 175, which provided that the governor could make regulations for cargo ship safety construction requirements and surveys to remove duplication with the powers in Sections 172A and 173A. Clause 9 deletes reference to a passenger ship safety certificate in Section 180 to avoid duplication of provisions dealing with such certificates in the SOLAS regulations. Clause 10 and Clause 11 amend Sections 181 and 182 respectively to retain powers for survey requirements for radio installations in respect of ships on non-international voyages. Clause 12 amends the heading of Section 184 to remove reference to the ISM code since the relevant subsections were previously repealed by Act Number 2 of 2020. Clause 13 repeals Section 186 on the issue of various safety certificates to Virgin Island ships, for which provision is now made in new SOLAS regulations. Clause 14 amends Section 188.2 to empower the Managing Director to determine the form of the safety certificate, while Clause 15 amends Section 189 to delete provision for the duration of SOLAS certificates, which are now dealt with in the SOLAS regulations. Clause 16 amends Section 191 to clarify that the sections applies to the granting of exemption certificates in respect of ships on non-international voyages. Clause 17 amends Section 191 on the extension of certificates to restrict its application to ships on non-international voyages. Clause 18 repeals duplicate provisions in Sections 192 on the issue and endorsement of certificates by another government, and 193 on ships not registered in the Virgin Islands to which the Safety Convention applies. Clause 19 amends Section 194 relating to the issue of certificates to non-Virgin Island ships to restrict its application to ships not engaged on international voyages. Clause 20 repeals duplicate provision in subsection 1 of Section 197, prohibiting Virgin Island ships from proceeding on international voyages without appropriate documentation. Clause 21 makes a consequential amendment to Section 200 as a result of the repeal of Section 197.1, while Clause 22 repeals Section 204 in respect of the inspection of ships holding Safety Convention certificates. These inspections will be provided for in the SOLAS regulations. Clause 23 repeals Section 205A, which makes provision for the approval of maritime marine equipment. This provision will be included in the SOLAS regulations. Clauses 24 through 26 enhance police powers to enforce the Act. Clause 24 amends Section 415 of the Act to add inspectors and police officers to the persons empowered to demand ship documents. Clause 25 amends Section 417 of the Act and extends the power of inspectors in relation to premises and ships to police officers for the purpose of investigating an offense under the Act or regulations made under it. Clause 26 amends Section 419 to correct the cross-references to subsections of Section 414 and Clause 27. And Clause 27 amends Section 420 to correct the cross-references to subsections of Section 414. Part 28 inserts a new part, this would be a Part 17A, entitled Maritime Enforcement to enhance general maritime enforcement powers aimed at improving the investigation and prosecution of crimes on Virgin Island ships and other ships in Virgin Islands waters. Section 430A provides law enforcement officers who are constables in the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force or persons of a description specified by the governing regulations with maritime enforcement powers. The maritime enforcement powers are powers to stop, board, divert, and detain a ship, search a ship and obtain information, and arrest persons and seize property. The powers relate to general criminal offenses, which are defined as offenses under any other law in the Virgin Islands. Section 430B sets out the restrictions on the exercise of the maritime enforcement powers. The powers may not be exercised in relation to a Virgin Islands ship in foreign waters or a foreign ship in Virgin Islands waters without the authority of the Attorney General. Section 430B also imposes other conditions on the use of the powers. Section 430C and D provide a procedure for the exercise of the power of hot pursuit, but restricts the power by requiring the authority of the governor, which may only be granted in accordance with international cooperation or international law. Section 430E, F, and G elaborate on the powers to stop, board, divert, and detain a ship, search a ship and obtain information, and arrest persons and seize property. Section 430H makes supplementary provision in respect of the powers of search and seizure. Section 430I provides for law enforcement officers to be accompanied by other persons to seize equipment or materials and protect officers from criminal or civil liability where actions are done in good faith on reasonable grounds. Section 430J provides for the creation of offenses and summary penalties, while Section 430K empowers the governor to issue a code of practice in respect of the practice to be followed by law enforcement officers when arresting a person under Section 430G. Section 430L defines certain terms used in this part. Clause 29 repeals Section 465 of the Act, which required the Secretary of State to be consulted prior to making any subsidiary legislation under the Act. Clause 30 inserts a new Schedule 7, which provides an additional list of countries whose nationals qualify to register ships in the Virgin Islands under Section 4 of the Act. This list ensures that all countries qualify to own a ship on the UK register, and any other countries, with the exception of Russia, while sanctioned, whose citizens and companies were previously qualified to own a ship in the Virgin Islands under the repealed recognized jurisdictions list, are qualified to own VI flag ships. Madam Speaker, the amendments that we seek to make to the Merchant Shipping Act will enhance the government's ability to oversee and regulate activities involving Virgin Islands registered ships internationally, ensure the effective transposition of future amendments to IMO conventions efficiently, and formalize the responsibilities of relevant local authorities in maritime safety, enforcement, and environmental protection. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Madam Speaker, I rise a second. And Madam Speaker, when I listen to the Premier as he presents the bill for a second reading, I couldn't help, Madam Speaker, but notice something very peculiar and something I think that we all need to be cognizant of and help to guard against. I don't know, my device doesn't want to cooperate with me, so I'll try to use another one. It's not as favorable. Yes, Madam Speaker, devolution is something that we must all take seriously. And any attempt to impinge upon what has been devolved to us must be defended vigorously and fearlessly. As I listen to the Premier, I keep hearing the word governor come up in this bill. And it might have been appropriate when the Virgin Islands Shipping Registry, under another name, was first established, that any legislation that was made at the time, governor would have been a term that you would hear. Probably it would have been governor and council, which has since been changed to cabinet or executive council. But in this piece of legislation, Madam Speaker, there's no pretense about it. The first thing you would notice in it, it says the governor shall make regulations. And even before that, Madam Speaker, it speaks about it says, this act shall come into force on such date as the governor made by proclamation published in the Gazette at point. It says that. It's in here. And everything else talk about the governor making regulations and all that stuff. And I think that we need to be careful. And every member of this House has a responsibility to ensure that we don't lose a single inch, not an inch, of what we have. And we lose it by, it comes to us in a form that is, I would say, palatable if you're not cognizant of what you're doing. We will pass this bill, Madam Speaker, and it becomes law. And the Premier who's responsible for this subject has absolutely no authority under this bill. We can't allow that to happen. If you look at the Constitution, Madam Speaker, Section 60 of the Constitution, it talks about the governor's special responsibilities. It said that the governor shall be responsible for the conduct subject to this Constitution and any other law. So even though the Merchant Shipping, Virgin Islands Shipping Registry, you wouldn't find it in the Constitution. The Constitution would not point you to it. But it also said, and any other law. So here we are making a law that makes this a part of the governor's special responsibility. We have to be woke, Madam Speaker. Or else we will just be wearing suits with zero authority. And everyone is looking to us as if we do. But we're doing it to ourselves. I implore my fellow colleagues to do what you have been doing recently, which is making legislation that conform to the Constitution. And this is another opportunity. And when we get back here to the House, we'll be debating some matters that will bring it full circle. What is trying to do to us? We know we need to start now and make sure that we don't continue down this road. I'll continue, Madam Speaker. As I said, the governor shall be responsible for the conduct subject to this Constitution and any other law of any business of the government of the Virgin Islands, including the administration of any department of government with respect to the following matters. A, external affairs. B, defense. C, internal security. D, the terms and conduct of service, the terms of conditions of service of persons holding or acting in public offices without prejudice, Section 92. And E, the administration of the courts. And the governor shall keep the Premier fully informed concerning the general conduct of these matters, and the Premier may request information in respect of any particular matter. 2, the governor acting after consultation with the Premier may assign to any member of the Cabinet responsibility for the conduct on behalf of the governor of any business in the House of Assembly with respect to any of the matters mentioned in subsection 1. The governor acting in his or her discretion may, by direction in writing, delegate with the prior approval of the Secretary of State to the Premier or any other minister designated by the Premier or designated by the Governor on the advice of the Premier such responsibility for matters of external affairs or internal security as the Governor may think fit. upon such terms and conditions as he or she may impose. I'm not going any further, Madam Speaker. It has a whole lot of other things. One of the other things that it doesn't have is original and shipping registry. And as I said, Madam Speaker, that is my concern, and that's a concern I want to raise before this Honorable House and have other members see it as a matter for us to be concerned about, and that we should fix this as we go through the committee stage, Madam Speaker, throughout the entire bill, where the word governor appears, to make sure we put minister. And if need be, Madam Speaker, cabinet. We cannot continue like this. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honorable members. The floor is now open for debate. I recognize the leader of the opposition, Honorable Myron Walwin.
Much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is a very hefty piece of legislation. And it follows, Madam Speaker, some similar trends to some of the bills that we were discussing, where we saw that there were some possible incursions on civil liberties, and also where authority, if not properly used, could be abused. It is one of those bills, Madam Speaker, that I can support, but my support is subject to certain things that must happen. And when I get to that place in the bill where it's of major concern to me, I will tell you whether I can support or not. Obviously, my support would have to come in the committee stage, because what I'm suggesting, I believe, is very important, Madam Speaker, for the functioning of the bill. Madam Speaker, we know, or we may not know, that a country can exercise jurisdiction over a vessel that's registered within that country and one that's flying its flag. And that jurisdiction comes from internationally recognized principles that a country may regulate the conduct of its nationals wherever, Madam Speaker, they're located. And you can see that, for instance, in section 430B of the bill, where if a Virgin Islands ship is involved in a criminal matter in foreign waters, before they enter the ship, wherever the ship is, the authority of the Honorable Attorney General is required. Madam Speaker, I'll start off first by echoing similar sentiments raised by the Honorable Deputy Premier. And Madam Speaker, he is quite right in what he's saying in relation to the powers that are given to the governor in this particular bill. He also read out, Madam Speaker, the requisite sections of the Constitution, which I agree with. But it's also important to know that the shipping registry is a body corporate, is it not? And it is under the purview of the Premier, under the Premier's office. And we continue to see these incursions on statutory corporations. And I don't know when we are going to understand it. I don't know if it's that we're deliberately trying not to understand. But a statutory corporation has its own legal personality. It has its board of directors that have fiduciary responsibilities and other responsibilities to the organization. Even the premier himself can't do certain things when it comes to statutory corporations that are under his purview. So certainly for the governor to be making regulations with regards to the shipping registry certainly is not the right approach. And I certainly support that wherever the governor appears in the document, and it's not personal in any way, wherever governor appears, Madam Speaker, changes has to be made where the minister who has conduct of the subject is the person who is responsible. Now, Madam Speaker, the bill does a lot of cleaning up of things that deals with laws of the sea and different things to make sure that we are compliant. It also, we see where arrangements are made for inserting the United Kingdom in certain parts. Obviously, that has to do somewhat with the United Kingdom no longer being in the EU. I also see, Madam Speaker, in Section 4, implementation of Safety Convention and to have its force of law in 172A. And I'm raising this just as a side before I get into the substantive parts of the bill, because when you look at the interpretation of ship in the substantive legislation, it includes every description of vessel used in navigation. And I remember just the other day when we were discussing the tobacco bill, I raised the concern that of many citizens in this country about the emission of smoke from cruise ships. And if we're looking at the safety regulations, I imagine there must be something in those regulations that will speak to environmental concerns. We have a lot of people here who have cancer. Matter of fact, a number of persons who are suffering from cancer called me about that situation with that smoke. We don't know what is being emitted in the atmosphere. And so, Minister of Health, as I speak, I look at you. We have to make sure that our people are protected and that they're breathing clean air. Madam Speaker, I want to go to Section 430A, that installation of that section. 430A. And the heading says application of maritime enforcement powers in general. And it says in 430A, a law enforcement officer, and I will get to that a little further down, may, for the purpose of preventing, detecting, investigating, or prosecuting a criminal offense, exercise any of the maritime enforcement powers. And it says in relation to a Virgin Islands ship in Virgin Islands waters, foreign waters or international waters. B, a ship without nationality in Virgin Islands waters or international waters. A foreign ship in the Virgin Islands waters or international waters. And a ship registered under the law of a recognized jurisdiction in the Virgin Islands waters or in international waters. And recognized jurisdictions are at Schedule 7, Madam Speaker, of the amendment. I want to look first, Madam Speaker, at that term, general criminal offense. And these sections, these 430 sections, A, B, C, that go all the way to K, Madam Speaker, those sections were lifted almost verbatim from the Police and Crime Act of 2017 in the United Kingdom. Almost verbatim in some respects. We chuck in things like we like to chuck in for our own purposes, and of course I will catch those things and deal with them at the appropriate time. But that's where it came from. And Madam Speaker, when this bill was being debated in the UK, there was great concern around this issue of general criminal offense. Because a general criminal offense, Madam Speaker, as is defined in 430A 3B, is an offense under the law of the Virgin Islands other than an offense under this Act or regulations made under it. So essentially, any law that's under the criminal code will be considered a general offense. There was one argument being put forward by a member of the House of Lords, and he used the example of stealing a Mars bar. That would be considered a general offense. Are we saying that you're going to stop a ship, you're going to detain it, you're going to jump on it, you're going to do all manner of things if somebody steals a Mars bar? And that is what really happens when you use that term, general criminal offense. Because really, what this is supposed to be doing is dealing with serious offenses. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, murder, rape, the most serious of offenses. And so even though the section the term general criminal offense still obtains in the Police and Crime 2017 Act, I think that we can do a little better in terms of narrowing down on what sort of offenses we really mean, as opposed to having it simply be a general criminal offense. When you go on to section 2 of 430A, the maritime enforcement powers are set out in section 430D, the power to stop, board, divert, and detain. B, section 430E, the power to search and obtain. And C, section 430F, the power of arrest and seizure. And Madam Speaker, you would know very well that these are very, very serious powers that a law enforcement officer will have. As a matter of fact, if he was on land operating, for the powers of arrest and seizure, he would require a warrant. Because of the exigencies of the situation on water, a warrant would not be practical. By the time you get to the courthouse and come back, the boat done gone. So, Madam Speaker, it is important that proper safeguards are put in place for the use of those powers that the police officer will exercise. And when you go through the bill, Madam Speaker, there is an absence of proper oversight. An absence of proper oversight in relation to the exercising of those powers. And I will show you what I mean, Madam Speaker, when I get there. Now, 3A says, for the purpose of this part, A, the following persons are law enforcement officers. 1, a constable who is a member of a Royal Virgin Islands police force. And 2, a person of a description specified in regulations made by the governor. Now, we don't talk about the governor part already. I do not believe that he should be making any regulations in relation to this, for the reasons I've given before and the reasons given by the Honorable Deputy Premier. But it says a constable who is a member of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. And a constable, Madam Speaker, could be anybody who just joined the police force. Yes? Yes? I'm looking at the officers. Yes. A police officer who come with the last shower of rain. He just passed the police exam and he's a constable. And you're going to drop these major powers to go in and detain and seize assets and do all kinds of things, and you're going to give that to a constable who just come with the last shower of rain? To me, that is not the wisest thing. There has to be some level of experience because you don't have that oversight. If that constable wanted to exercise some of these powers, Madam Speaker, on land, he would have to go to get a warrant. So how is it now on sea? We're taking on the body to see nothing out there but you and Jesus. And he got all this power out there and he do whatever he wants with you out there. I don't think that's what we want. we have to look at that particular rank to make sure, Madam Speaker, that it is some officer of a particular rank with some level of experience. And then the question of a person of a description specified in regulations made by the governor. I know the question came up this morning in the discussions, Madam Speaker, in the informal session about customs, but I ain't buying it. I'm not buying it. The law is specifying, Madam Speaker, who an enforcement officer is for the purposes of carrying out this type of work. Because if anything happens on sea, and something happens, the lawyers are going to make sure that they go to the law, and we are going to look to see who had the requisite authority to do certain things. And if customs go and do certain things that the police, according to this act, should have conduct of, and they're not listed as a law enforcement officer, you could have some trouble. Additionally, Premier, some of your powers from the customs is going to the police. That is what I'm seeing happening here. I know that customs may have additional powers in other pieces of legislation, but they are responsible, as far as my knowledge goes, for border security. So why can't it be a shared responsibility? Why can't the customs officers also have the same level of powers? And I say to say, because even though, yes, you have customs officers in the UK, and you have police officers in the UK, when you look at their maritime enforcement powers, I will read out the designation of what a law enforcement officer means, right? And the law enforcement officer is essentially the same, has the same meaning as ours in this piece of legislation. And these persons are designated as law enforcement officers under their act, which we basically lifted and have put in here in those 430 pieces of legislation. And these are the persons who are enforcement officers. A designated customs official within the meaning of Part 1 of the Borders, Citizenship and Immigration Act. A designated NCA officer who is authorized by the Director General of the National Crime Agency. A member of the Ministry of the Defense Police. A member of the Royal Navy Police, or even a member of the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. So if in the UK itself, where we lifted the legislation from, customs officers have that level of authority to be enforcement officers under their act, why are customs officers being excluded here? They should be included in the legislation for the avoidance of doubt. Even if the powers might exist elsewhere, for the purposes of this act, it must list the customs officers. And I would even go as far as to say immigration officers as well, because they're all part of law enforcement, should be considered here as well. And then, Madam Speaker, Section 430B places some restrictions on the exercise of maritime enforcement powers. And it says, the authority of the Attorney General is required by law enforcement officers. The authority of the Attorney General is required before a law enforcement officer exercises any of the maritime enforcement powers in reliance on Section 430A1 in relation to a Virgin Islands ship in foreign waters. That's the point I opened up with when I said that a country would still have certain jurisdictions over their nationals, regardless of where they are. And so if a Virgin Islands ship is in foreign waters, you can't enter that ship unless you get the approval of the Attorney General. My concern is what this act doesn't do. It doesn't tell us if somebody's apprehended on a BVI ship. Before the police could come or BVI could get in, could be part of what is taking place. What happens to the suspect's rights during that intervening period? And that is something that certainly, Madam Speaker, during the committee stage, I would like to hear a bit more as to how that would be dealt with. 430C deals with the hot pursuit of ships from Virgin Islands waters. And I can't pretend to be an expert on this stuff because I am not. But when I look at hot pursuits, even in the Police and Crime Act of 2017, I saw the hot pursuits in the waters of England and Scotland, but this one seems to be the opposite, that it is from the Virgin Islands waters, and I'm wondering if that might be an error. But again, within the committee stage, we can talk about it. And it says in 430C, a law enforcement officer may, for the purpose of preventing, detecting, investigating, or prosecuting a general criminal offense, exercise any of the maritime enforcement powers in relation to a ship that is no longer in Virgin Islands waters if A, the ship is pursued from Virgin Islands waters, immediately before the pursuit of the ship was in Virgin Islands waters, C, before the pursuit of the ship, a signal was given for it to stop, D, the signal was given in such a way as to be audible or visible from the ship, and E, the pursuit of the ship is not interrupted. And when I look to see how hot pursuit powers are used, they said that they're usually used for serious criminal offenses, drug trafficking, people smuggling, terrorism-related activity, and weapons smuggling. And that is why I'm suggesting that we remove this thing of general crime or general criminal offense and make it something, Madam Speaker, certainly a bit more serious. And of course, you know that there are conventions on the laws of the sea that deals with the whole issue of how hot pursuit is done. And 2 says, for the purposes of section 1E, pursuit is not interrupted by reason only of the fact that A, the method of carrying out the pursuit or the identity of the ship or aircraft carrying out the pursuit changes during the course of the pursuit. Now, this is where I have a challenge. And Madam Speaker, some of these bills, you become a student because you don't know the thing, then you have to go research them. And so I'm concerned in my research when I look at B. It says the identity of the ship or aircraft carrying out the pursuit changes during the course of the pursuit. And my understanding, Madam Speaker, of hot pursuit, the hot pursuit must be continuous and uninterrupted. So in the case of B, it says the identity of the ship or aircraft carrying out the pursuit changes during the course of the pursuit. Then it means that there's a break in the chase. Yes, it could be. It could be. It could be. You might have somebody stop and go on another vessel, and jump on and go on another vessel and go. It doesn't necessarily have to be that I was chasing and my boat gone and somebody's come and chase immediately. There could be a break, and once there is a break in the pursuit, it is no longer hot pursuit. So we have to have a discussion. I might lose the argument, but I'll put up a good one, because I don't think that this is consistent with how, Madam Speaker, this is supposed to be done. Article 430D speaks about the authority of the governor again and places some restrictions. We have already discussed how that is supposed to be addressed. 430E speaks to power to stop, board, divert, and detain. And it says here, this section applies if a law enforcement officer has reasonable grounds to suspect that a criminal offense, any criminal offense, is being or has been committed on a ship in relation to which the powers conferred by this section are exercisable by virtue of section 430A and 430C. And C deals with hot pursuit, and A deals with general maritime powers. A ship in relation to which those powers are so exercisable is otherwise being used in connection with the commission of a criminal offense. And 2 says the law enforcement officer, and these are the powers that the law enforcement officer has. This constable may stop the ship. Stop the ship. So he here on the ship, somebody steals a candy and he gonna stop the ship. Board the ship and require the ship to be taken to a port in the Virgin Islands or elsewhere and detained there. Those are sweeping powers without a warrant that a constable could take. And it says here in 3, except as provided by subsection 5, the authority of the governor again, the governor all over the thing, is required before a law enforcement officer may exercise the power conferred by subsection 2C to require the ship to be taken to a port outside of the Virgin Islands. Then, Madam Speaker, I want to go on and look at 430G. The power of arrest and seizure. Now, this, Madam Speaker, for me, is the deal breaker. Remember I said that I could support or not support depending on what happened in committee stage, but committee stage is after the fact, really. But the powers of arrest and seizure, it says here that this section applies if a law enforcement officer has reasonable grounds to suspect that a general criminal offense has been or is being committed on a ship, in relation to which the powers conferred by this section are exercisable by virtue of section 430A, again which deals with the general powers, and 430C, which deals with hot pursuit. And it says, the law enforcement officer may arrest without a warrant anyone whom the officer has reasonable ground for suspecting to be guilty of the offense, and B, seize and retain anything found on the ship which appears to the officer to be evidence of the offense, other than anything that the officer has reasonable grounds to believe to be an item subject to legal privilege. Now, the powers of seizure and arrest are serious powers, particularly the powers of seizure, because you just can't seize things like that without a warrant and land. And so, Madam Speaker, there is nothing that gives directions, there's no code of practice that goes along with this section. And that is where the deal breaker is for me. There needs to be a code of practice, Madam Speaker, before these sections are implemented. And there's a code of practice under the exact provision in the Police and Crime Act. And I'll read a portion of it. It says, a person who is arrested or further arrested for an offense under the law of England and Wales under section 90, that's where this whole section is on section 90 of the Police and Crime Act, must be informed as soon as it is practicable that they are under arrest and the grounds and reason for the arrest. They make provisions for the caution. They have outlined the terms of the caution, what it should say, and it sets out strict guidelines, Madam Speaker, that the officer must follow, and also things that the persons who are being arrested and interviewed should know. It speaks about urgent interviews and how those are handled. It speaks to the power to obtain information, detention conditions, the records of arrest, a variety of things that is given to police officers, and a copy of this is also given to the persons who are being investigated so that they can know what their rights are. And you need to do that. You need to do that because there is no magistrate or judge out there. It's the police constable and them poor people and Jesus. And they can do whatever they want out there on that seat to those people that don't know a thing about their rights or what is required. It's not the same as if you're on land. You may not be able to have a phone to call, to make a phone call, do nothing. But you must know what your rights are. And the police must have something to guide them because they are dealing with some very serious civil liberties that could be abused, Madam Speaker, if we're not paying close attention. I go on, Madam Speaker, to portions of 430I. And the heading is Maritime Enforcement Powers, Other Supplementary Provisions. And it says a law enforcement officer may be accompanied by other persons and take equipment or material to assist the officer in the exercise of powers under this act. Same provision in the Police and Crime Act of 2017. I'm not sure if I like this section that deals with the police could be accompanied by other persons. I'm not sure because I don't know who those other persons are. Who would be the persons accompanying the police? I decided to go out there, I walk with my cousin and my uncle, and we go out there, go on a boat to harass people. So I think we need to look at that to see the persons who are with the police must be other law enforcement officers. I don't think it should just be any old person to go out there with the police to go on those boats. I don't subscribe to that. Again, particularly because of the nature of it and the fact that there is very little oversight. The law itself has got to protect both the officer and the persons who are going to be intercepted. It just can't be any old person who go out there with a police officer. It has to be somebody who is also a law enforcement officer, or somebody who can be given certain powers almost immediately for the purposes of what they're trying to do, and the powers can be revoked after. But it cannot be up to the police officer to grab who he wants to grab, to say some other person to go on the boats or the ships to do these sort of things. I don't think that is what we want to do. A law enforcement officer may use reasonable force if necessary in the performance of the functions under this part. And then 3 says, a person accompanying a law enforcement officer under subsection 1 may perform any of the officer's function under this part, but under the officer's supervision. You see how dangerous that is? So he will walk with the cousin, he walk with the uncle, then go out on the ship so that people them steal some Mars bars. And now the cousin and the uncle have the same powers as the police officer. That's what we want? Amen. I see you agree with me. You can agree with me on TV, you know. I don't think that's what we want. You want to have, Madam Speaker, certainly more safeguards in place. And then 5 says, a law enforcement officer, and this is where, for instance, as I said, portions of these bills were lifted, Madam Speaker, from the Police and Crime Act. And this particular section that I'm reading, that's the Maritime Enforcement Powers, that came from Section 104 of the Act. But Section 104 of the Act does not have in number 5. We insert that ourselves. A law enforcement officer, this is 5. A law enforcement officer is not liable in any criminal or civil proceedings for anything done in the purported performance of functions under this part if the court is satisfied that the act was done in good faith and there were reasonable grounds for doing it. I don't like that. I don't like these kind of immunities that we're digging in all the time for law enforcement and other people who wielding certain powers because they act carelessly. When they know they have these powers, they don't exercise that duty of care that they're supposed to exercise because they believe they have the protection under the law. Now, explain to me, you out there on the open sea, you are ship with people and Jesus. And something happened out there that you do wrong. Who gonna come and say that you weren't acting in good faith? You make up your own story. Think anybody around? You, Jesus, and the ship. And so, as I said, when you're exercising those kind of powers, you have to make sure the appropriate safeguards, Madam Speaker, are in place. And we have to stop getting away from this thing that if you're carrying out a job, Madam Speaker, and you know you're doing it diligently, why you have to hide behind the law for protection for? The same thing happened with Hickenbottom. The same argument I make. You come and you make a report and you call everybody thief, and then you run back to the UK and you're going to put a law up there that you can't be sued. Man, you need to stand by your work. So why is it every time we see these things, we see all the time something coming where there's some sort of protection, hiding from something? No. Because you know what end up happening, Premier? You're going to get sued as Minister of Finance. The public's purse is going to pay. Because people are not exercising diligence in what they do. And so they can then do things that are outside the scope of their responsibilities. And then the people, the innocent people, the same people that we can take up and give a little food voucher to buy some food, is their little money from the treasury got to be shedding out all the time when these public officials do things that they're not supposed to be doing, because you'll get sued in the end. So these protection things that are in place, I'm sorry, I'm not in support of them. I'm not in support of them. And this section, as I said, is not in the section 104 in the Police and Crime Act. Every other provision is there. This portion was inserted by us. And then you go on, Madam Speaker, to 430J that speaks about maritime enforcement powers and offenses. It says, a person commits an offense if the person, A, intentionally obstructs a law enforcement officer, fails without reasonable excuse to comply, and then 2 goes on to mention in providing information. But 3, if you look at 3, it says a law enforcement officer may arrest without a warrant anyone whom the officer has reasonable grounds for suspecting to be guilty of an offense under this section. So the section then creates an offense in subsection 3. But then look at 4. A person guilty of an offense under this section is liable on summary conviction to a fine. The section creates an offense with no particulars. You have to say what kind of fine it is. That's what the House of Assembly is supposed to do. In the UK section, it says, if I were to read this in the UK, in what the UK says, a person guilty of an offense under this section is liable on summary conviction to a fine at level 5. That's what their legislation says, and they have their levels for their fines. So we have to make sure we put in what the fines are here, because that is the job of the House of Assembly. And then, Madam Speaker, 430K. It says the governor, which we've already discussed this already, but even if we say minister, let's substitute and say minister. The minister may prepare and issue a code of practice in respect of the practice to be followed by law enforcement officers when arresting a person under the power conferred by section 430G. It says may. It's supposed to be shall. And that is where my problem resides. And the shall, I believe fervently that this code of practice needs to be put in place before effect is given to these sweeping powers to enforcement officers. I believe that fervently, because people's rights are going to get abrogated. And the same way we could look at the Police and Crime Act of 2017 and lift up the procedures and put them here, they have a code of practice as well. Lift up the same code of practice and bring it forward. Let us not go forward to put these powers in the hands of a constable with no proper guidance as to how those powers should be exercised, and without the people who are being affected knowing what their rights are. Because this is unfamiliar territory for people. There's some commonality with criminal laws and so forth in different jurisdictions, particularly in Commonwealth jurisdictions, but you're out there in the water. This is unfamiliar territory. And so people must be aware of their rights, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to read something as well in relation to 430K1. You see in there where we said the governor may prepare and issue a code of practice? I'm saying we should say shall and not may. But even if we want to put the premier, you can't put that responsibility, Madam Speaker, in the hands of one person to make that code of practice. And I will read to you what Baroness William of Trafford's speech was when they were bringing in to effect the piece of legislation on the code. At 6, he says, to ensure that the code will be practical and effective. And this is the same code that I'm saying, copy the code. The same way we copy the legislation. And there's nothing wrong with copying the stuff, because if the legislation is elsewhere, nobody goes back and they go redraft all them things when you have them thing out there. Every law you have, you could find one somewhere before. All you gotta do is take it and tailor it to your needs. That's the way it works. But he says to ensure that the code will be practical and effective. The government have consulted the law enforcement agencies that will use this code. So they've consulted with the agencies. In this case, I'm suggesting you use police, immigration, and customs. Representatives of the legal profession. So they went outside to show you how serious it is. They went outside to seek advice from the bar. They said devolved administrations, other organizations, and interested government departments. And they came together and put this code together. And we want to put an important code like this in the hands of one person. Be it minister, be it governor, it is wrong. And then look at 3. 430K3. A failure of a law enforcement officer to comply with any provision of the code does not of itself render the law enforcement officer liable to any criminal or civil proceedings. You hear the nonsense again? You see the behavior? Premier, you see what I'm talking about? So you're basically cutting discretionary powers of ministers. Ministers mustn't do this, ministers mustn't do that, they mustn't do the other. But on the other hand, look at what you're saying. You're absolving a law enforcement officer of criminal and civil liability for any failings under this act. That's what we want to do. I thought that nobody was above the law. If the law says you're supposed to do X, Y, that's why I said the code is supposed to be, because this, Madam Speaker, this is where the very abuse comes in. This is where the very abuse that I'm talking about comes in. Because if you know that under this act that gives you sweeping powers without a warrant, that you will not be held liable for any criminal or civil actions that you take, you're going to exercise any duty of care with anybody out there in the sea with you, the ship, and Jesus? I take the incursions on my civil liberties and the civil liberties of other people very, very seriously. And so, Madam Speaker, in wrapping up, I can support the bill, but my support is contingent upon a code of practice being put in place before those sections, the 430 sections that give these sweeping powers to law enforcement officers, take effect. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the member for the 2nd District, Honorable Melvin Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to give my contributions to this bill before us, the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill of 2025. And I was trying to find out, Madam Speaker, if before this, any amendments would have been done recently or prior to, not prior to, but post 2007, 2021. And Madam Speaker, I start there. Thank you, AG, for that information. I start there because I listened to the Honorable Deputy Premier and then the Leader of the Opposition speak about the sections in this piece of legislation that deal with the governor having responsibility for merchant shipping, where the Premier and Minister of Finance is the one who has the ultimate responsibility for the subject matter. And Madam Speaker, I wanted to find out if there was any amendments to this legislation prior because, or after 2007, because in 2007, via the constitutional order of the Virgin Islands, we moved towards further securing our advancement with ministerial responsibilities and ensuring where we could give the ministers in the executive powers and overall responsibility to be able to deal with their subject matter. And I'm not sure, Madam Speaker, what all entails in the 2021 amendment, but it may have been oversight of something that we should have amended then, which I'm hoping, hearing from the Honorable Deputy Premier and the Leader of Opposition, that we will do now, which is make the change to from governor to minister. And even if it includes minister in cabinet. Madam Speaker, before I get into the debate, I've been saying this for a little while now, not just in this house, but the undercurrent of what continues to show its ugly head in our territory. The narrative, the publications, I want to call it the high science approaches towards having the advancements that we've made in this territory through our constitutional advancement and development for this territory are being walked back or suggested to be walked back in legislations, in publications, in COI recommendations, in law, what is that one? What is that last one called? Volume 2. Law enforcement review part one, and now we have part two. And the narrative is that we are not good enough. And Madam Speaker, I will continue to bellow from wherever I could be heard and say that we are in fact good enough. And we as a Virgin Islands people are more than enough. Because when they thought that we couldn't be anything, look at what we've been able to achieve and accomplish. So, Madam Speaker, my debate will start with some reminder points to the Honorable Premier and leader of government business, now also leader of the territory of this Virgin Islands, Premier. I said it to you before. Outside the customs, which has a little bit of I would say difficulty to right now go to, but you have acting post, chief immigration officer, acting post, Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, acting post. And Premier, if we and you and your government don't move, including in this honorable house, through the Speaker, Madam Speaker, I apologize. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Premier, through the Speaker and your government, if you don't move with haste to ensure that the people that are in these positions, acting are not conformed. Madam Speaker, I am wary and fearful that these positions will be filled yet again by persons that do not understand or care to understand the BVI. And there will be a further separation of the authoritative powers and responsibilities here in these Virgin Islands, where there are they and then there is us. And the narrative continues to dictate that we are not enough. We are criminals, we are corrupt, we are this, we are that. So, Premier, that is my encouragement. And wherever else you have persons in acting positions that they feel that somebody coming from the UK may be better than our people, we need to shut that argument down. Commissioner, when I ain't gonna call her no acting nothing. Commissioner Jackie Vanterpool, that's what I call her. Commissioner Jackie Vanterpool. I believe there's about 6 months she's been acting in this position as Commissioner of Police, Madam Speaker. And a lot of questions been asked in the public, even in this honorable house, about what we're going to do this and what we're going to do, how we're going to get this done. And in 6 months, Madam Speaker, you're seeing things happening. Before, when I saying this, Madam Speaker, because I was here asking a question. You know, I always kicking about King Adam police station. When you ask about policing in the territory and how we're going to combat crime, oh, we need more resources and we need more officers and we need more money and we need more and we need more. And now this good lady is acting for 6 months and people getting arrested. And there's a level of confidence, Madam Speaker, in her leadership because she's coming out in the community and having discussions and meeting with the people and trusting her officers, Madam Speaker, to do their job. But if we ain't careful, I ain't read the report yet, Madam Speaker, the part two. I got to be full. I got to be full. I got to be awake. I got to have some coffee. Because if it's anything, and I almost guarantee it's just a continuation of where they started part one. Part two, there'll be a little bit more height than Part 1. Part 1 gives you the introduction to where you're going to end. And I could only imagine how much more examples that they would find to try to qualify the assertions that they would have made in the first report. And I have a problem with that, Madam Speaker, because the Virgin Islands Constitution order speaks about a modern partnership. So rather than continuing to beat me over the head and tell me what wrong, what need to be fixed, Madam Speaker, we are dependent still on you. Help me. Kevin Hart say help. Help me. This is not a test. We know what exists, Madam Speaker. Help me, help us, so that we could improve upon our system, so we could improve upon the things that we have been lacking. Madam Speaker, this bill before this honorable House, Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill, we had a committee meeting this morning, informal meeting with the director and all the qualified persons within the Ministry of Finance and Shipping Registry and Customs and everybody else. And Madam Speaker, the BVI has 200 nautical miles of water that we're responsible for. We all know, Madam Speaker, that right now we don't have all the resources necessary to be able to secure, monitor the waters and the borders for which we are responsible for. And Madam Speaker, this has been known for years upon years. No fault of the Premier or past Premiers. But here's where security comes in. The United Kingdom, through the governor's office, is responsible for the security of our country, including our waters. I remember my little time there in the cabinet, Premier, we were trying to pass the the blue economy. I think you are on the way with that now, Premier. And there was one section that the former chair of cabinet highlighted. This deals with us under security, so we need you to pull that back and let us consult with the United Kingdom to see how we're going to deal with securing the border. Well, you know the borders is yours to secure. Bring in the boat, them, give us the resources, give us the training necessary to be able to do the things that we need to do, and stop telling me we corrupt. Or stop waiting until something continually drastically happens and then to say, oh, the BVI is this and the BVI is that, and you have to come in and sweep in like you use the Lord and Savior. Once we got the game old. It's an old game. And the people of the Virgin Islands tired of it. Members of the House of Assembly tired of it. Don't just tell me what's wrong. Do something about it, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in looking at this bill, and I'm going to try my best not to repeat a lot of what was said before, but Madam Speaker, I have to go in and start with what I believe from hearing from Managing Director Samuels and his team, and even the Premier and his objects of reading, and reading through the bill, Madam Speaker. I understand that the BVI is trying to not just partake in what currently exists, but we're trying to expand our horizons in terms of what occurs in our waters and be able to, as much as possible, be at the table in terms of being able to collect revenues, register ships, larger ships that we're currently doing, and have that world class approach because we are indeed on the world stage. So, Madam Speaker, when I look at Section 4, Clause 2 of this bill, and seeing that we are increasing the amount of jurisdictions and broadening, Madam Speaker, the ownership capacity with who we can register and who we can have enforcement regulations on, Madam Speaker, that is a good step. That is a good step because I remember, if it wasn't 2, it was probably 3+ years ago, before Mr. Samuels would have left the shipping registry before he came back. I know this is one of the things that he was talking about. We are regulating and where we are enforcing laws on what we have, but there's so much more to be had. And I believe this is where we're going, Madam Speaker. So that is indeed a good step because it bolsters the Virgin Islands maritime economy and enhance our global competitiveness. Madam Speaker, when I look at the ways in which we have approached how we do this, Madam Speaker, and no legislation is ever perfect, or nothing that we try to or attempt to do will ever be perfect. So there's always some areas that we would need to improve upon. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition, member for the 6th, touched on a lot of them, which he is more in tune and au fait with the law and how things would work and not work than I would be, Madam Speaker. But when you look at something like the safety of life at sea, which is abbreviated SOLAS, Madam Speaker, this is one of the 6 conventions that are detailed in a document that was provided to us through the Premier's office to help us understand further what this piece of legislation is attempted to do and where we would be in terms of our shipping registry and merchant shipping in the territory of the Virgin Islands. When you look at safety of life on the sea, it's ensuring that we will be meeting the international safety standards and safeguarding lives and property at sea. That's something good, Madam Speaker. When you get to Clause 28, Part 17A, where it talks about, and the Honorable Member for the opposition, Leader of Opposition, spent some time in 430A to K. The enhancement of the maritime enforcement powers. Madam Speaker, you understand that you're given more authoritative powers to do what needs to be done. It sounds good, but Deputy Premier brought it up. It sounds good. It may seem good, but we got to make sure that they line up properly. Make sure that the governor changed to Premier or Minister, because the Premier might not necessarily be the Minister, so let's change it to Minister. Because there's a Minister responsible for the shipping registry. And then when you think about that, these enhanced powers, Madam Speaker, would allow officers, and you say law enforcement officers, to be able to get more power to go on ships and confiscate things and question people and apprehend certain things and seize this. It sounds good because now you're expanding your horizon, so to speak. But Madam Speaker, I have a little challenge. My little challenge is a lot of challenge. Because here's another example of good intentions. But when you look at it, it's lacking some meat. Madam Speaker, you telling me, since I've been in this honorable house, elected since 2015 and before then, ministers of finance responsible for the customs have purchased and purchased and purchased maritime and secured border security vessels and been out there, COVID, they've been out there in joint operations, immigration officers have been out there in joint operations to help secure all borders from the very same things that some of the very same things that we're talking about. Illegal activity, trafficking of drugs, trafficking of human. And Madam Speaker, you're telling me that in this legislation is only reserved for police officers? Make it make sense. Help me, Kevin Hart. Help me. How? Because if it stays under one particular entity and they are able to bring in Premier, I want you to watch a game. According to say, watch a game. It stays under one entity and they are able to bring in the overarching leader of that entity. They can have a conversation and everything's supposed to be good. And all people who are criminals and who are doing the wrong things are left on the side. In our own country, when you have between the current acting commissioner of customs and his deputies qualified and trained individuals, man, we over the COVID time, we heard the bawling, the beckoning of those officers, trying to ensure that they receive firearm and safety training because they're out there on the waters jeopardizing their life and they have to wait for a officer, a police officer with a gun to come. Man, once we got to read the Bible, you got me out there, Lord send the rain, because I gone. If you got me out there with no machine, and nobody out there with a machine, send the wheel I jumping off, then you bring me a show. That's because this can't be what we're doing in 2025. Because on the flip side of it, Madam Speaker, I want to draw the balance and bring it to the awareness of the people of these Virgin Islands. On one hand, the COI, which was called in 2020? 2019 and 2020? About 2020. And Madam Speaker, four years later, you still have more and more COI officers coming to this territory. Them come in and come in and come out. I know they made them King Army upstairs. A lot of them upstairs. In the police station that I train to open, Madam Speaker. Them upstairs. They don't come downstairs with the cameras. Them upstairs. 4 years later, they're still coming to deal with a report that says everything wrong, nothing right. And this Merchant Shipping Amendment Act of 2025, which AG says was amended in 2021, and previous to that, about 2001. Madam Speaker, we know our borders have been a problem. You tell me you couldn't send some resources to help me do the things that I need to do? Including, Madam Speaker, including help with the legislations that you would have already adopted and is working for you in the United Kingdom. Madam Speaker, it's contradictory. You can't help for what you want to help, and everything you seem to want to help for is to fix what you say wrong. And when we're crying out that things wrong, help us, well, we have to look at your financial situations and your GDP, and you make a little too much money for us to give assistance for this and that. Madam Speaker, really? That old game. That's old game, Madam Speaker. And we got a book wide open. Madam Speaker, in section 175, 186, 192, and 205A, which is clause 8, 13, 22, and 23. In hearing from the director this morning, and even in the objects of reasons, Madam Speaker, and looking at the bill itself, this is where the team is looking to streamline and modernize the way we do things here in the territory. So it is now coming up to speed, Madam Speaker, with legal framework and reducing the administrative burdens and red tape and trying to align the current law, or this law, Madam Speaker, with what exists on the international stage. So I agree with things like that, Madam Speaker. But then, from my point 3 to my point 5, goes to the strengthening of police powers. Notice it's very specific, police powers, which is in sections 415, clause 24, where they will expand the police authority to investigate offenses and ensure that they have the ability to arrest, they have the ability to do whatever needs to be done according to them. The leader opposition said them out there with God or Jesus and you. And unless Jesus decides to come out from the throne, it's just them and you. And they have the authority, so it's really just you. Madam Speaker, not to say for a second that there aren't police officers who aren't honest and who aren't intent on doing their job and doing it properly. But Madam Speaker, it cannot be done in isolation. It cannot be done void of the proper checks and balances and accountability factors. We can't just leave it to chance because we're saying it's the police. Because if something happens which is contrary to the law, Madam Speaker, then as we go into legislation, you'll see that there's no recourse. If an officer breaks the law or goes against the law, Madam Speaker, you're not going to hold their account, or her, or them to account. And Madam Speaker, here's the bottom line of this whole thing. The bottom line of this whole thing is the intention for which the managing director, the premier, and his office is trying to ensure that we on this world stage is to continue to build the BVI brand. So while building the BVI brand, we must make sure the checks and balances exist all through. Not just on safety, not just on the waste. Madam Speaker, there's 6 pieces of convention, 6 conventions that we are signed on to that the team read this morning, and I'll read it for the sake of the public, Madam Speaker, and highlight some of the examples so that we understand. Madam Speaker, there's the implementation of the Load Lines Convention. That don't sound too sexy. But this convention, Madam Speaker, as it says in this document, regulates technical detail in relation to loading, stability, watertight integrity of ships, including provision for the survey of certification, inspection of ships for the purpose of ascertaining compliance with the convention. So, Madam Speaker, this is load line. This is making sure you rope them good, and you can hold the ship, you can hold the load, hold the strain, Madam Speaker. Number 2, the implementation of tonnage convention. Tonnage refers to the weight of a vessel. Port fees and other ship fees are charged based on the tonnage. The tonnage convention introduced a standards of global system for measuring gross and net tonnage. Gross tonnage forms the basis of manning regulations, safety regulations, and registration fees. And it goes into understanding the 1997, number 1510, etc. Number 3, Madam Speaker, the implementation of standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping for seafarers, STCW Convention. This one, Madam Speaker, establishes minimum standards for training, certification, and watchkeeping, assigning sailors to specific rules for seafarers. It is implemented in the Virgin Islands by the USKI 2022, and it goes on to the merchant shipping and all the things. This regulation specifically is mandatory for standards of competence and training certificate required, and ensuring that everybody on the ship is making provision for the safe manning and operation of the ship. Implementation, number 4, implementation of the MARPOL Convention. This convention, Madam Speaker, addresses prevention of the marine pollution from operational activities or accidental discharge on board vessels. 6 technical annexes provide regulations for. Annex 1, oil, preventing from the pollution for the operations of oil spills or accidents. 2, noxious liquid substances carried in bulk, how to discharge and clean residues from bulk cargo. 3, harmful substances carried by sea in packaged form. Sewage from ships, standards for discharging sewage in the sea and where prohibited. Garbage from ships, number 5, banning the disposal of plastics into the sea, categorizing the different levels of garbage and in the manner of disposal. And 6, air pollution, sets the limits on the emissions from the ship exhaust and measures to reduce the greenhouse. Madam Speaker, I can focus on number 3. Sorry, number 4. Sewage from ships. Because here's the thing about the BVI, whether you're in District 1 through 9, the BVI is surrounded by water. And right now, unless it is reported or somebody is caught red-handed, there is nothing that is currently being done to ensure that people are not dumping the sewage. And these are big ships we're talking about, but I'm talking even about the bare boats and the yachts. What is being enforced to ensure that we are protecting this resource that we have? So, Madam Speaker, these conventions that the team and this legislation is signing on to help strengthen what we do here in the BVI is extremely important. And all 6 annexes are extremely important, Madam Speaker, but we have to ensure, Premier, we have to ensure that where we lack the resources, where we lack the training, where we lack the skills, Madam Speaker, we're afraid to call for help. We're afraid to call for help. And if they don't help me, then we come talk with them. Because they have a responsibility to help and ensure that we are doing the things that need to be done. Madam Speaker, I'm almost done. I have a few points of concern. In this bill, section 430, 430F, (430S) deals with the search and seizure without a warrant. Leader opposition touched on that. So we're given authorization to search ships, personnel, cargo without judicial oversight. And my question always is, not that we're not doing what's right or appearing to do what's right, but Madam Speaker, how does the enforcement of this law or the enforcement of these powers match up with Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. How does it match up against Section 19 of the Virgin Islands Constitution, which deals with your rights and your freedoms, Madam Speaker? While we are given these powers, we have to ensure that we are doing it in a balanced way that is not top heavy, so to speak, Madam Speaker, that you're not infringing on the rights of the people. So, Madam Speaker, while the enforcement is critical, we must ensure that we safeguard and put safeguards in place to prevent arbitrary searches. We prevent searches on a will, on a whim, on a feeling or a thought. The arrest without warrant, 430G. I understand that the AG will be busier. She's always busy. Ensuring that the authorization given or needed to be able to execute these duties, Madam Speaker, are clearly set out and permission given, but Madam Speaker, it just can't be given at will. You can't tell me you're excluding I don't know what the correct term is in terms of the customs officers that are out on the sea doing their border security. But you can't tell me those senior officers, you're going to equate them with a constable. You can't tell me, Madam Speaker. You can't tell me. It doesn't make sense. Because if you go through the details of the police force, there's a certain level of training that you must go through and achieve to be able to execute certain duties and responsibilities. So, Madam Speaker, the use of force by law enforcement officers, which is in 40I, if you allow force to be used without strict limitations, you could lead to actions that may violate the prohibition of the inhumane treatment under Section 13 of the Virgin Islands Constitution Order 2007, and also Article 5 of the UDHR. Mr. Speaker, I hinted to her, so let me just say, while I appreciate and recognize the Honorable Attorney General, her powers too, Madam Speaker, and not the individual, but the office, the powers within the office. Just as if it was, we're suggesting a change from governor to minister, let's ensure that if it's going to be minister in cabinet, so that there's some sort of accountability factor. Now the AG is the AG, but the AG also would be able to report and give updates to and in cabinet, or if necessitated, Madam Speaker, to the National Security Council on operations that are happening. It has to be accountable. It just can't leave things out to chance, Madam Speaker, because at any time, you could have somebody that gone off the deep end. I know Honorable Dan Smith wouldn't go off the deep end. She's short like me, so she'll stay in shallow waters. Madam Speaker, I'm concluding. Madam Speaker, I believe that in 40K, where it deals with the lack of liability for the officers failing to follow the code of practice, and Madam Speaker, Honorable Walwyn spoke, Honorable Leader Opposition spoke about the code of practice, and I just want to highlight, Madam Speaker, 2001. I just want to highlight where I saw some areas in the code of practice that were in the UK that I believe while we took certain parts of it, Madam Speaker, it's important to ensure that wherever it would help to strengthen what we want to do, that we use it. So, Madam Speaker, this document, the Mass Maritime Autonomous Service Ships, the UK Code of Practice, Madam Speaker, November of 2018, it gives the ability for the enforcement of what I believe what we're trying to do. So when it comes to regulations, we have regulations that would be that very accountability factor that we're speaking about. So communication systems, safeguard management, the operator training, security and pollution prevention, ensuring, Madam Speaker, that while we are putting the legislation together and amending the legislation to be able to register bigger vehicle vessels, to be able to earn and bring in more revenues to our borders, we also have to ensure that the enforcement officers know what to look for, and they're trained to understand the different things that if this is a violation, if you have oil in the sea, or if you have this amount of oil or this in the sea, or how to be able to detect certain infractions within this piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. It just can't be on one end that we're giving you powers, but we have to give you the parameters and safeguards within those powers and the training necessary for you to be able to execute those powers. So, Madam Speaker, I believe that this legislation, health and safety, operator responsibility, risk assessment procedure, emergency procedures, the lines and training, which is one of the conventions that are there. Madam Speaker, I believe with everything that's in, we may not be able to use everything that is in the document from the United Kingdom, but where it comes with ensuring that our people are given all training tools necessary. Because now I could just be a police officer or a customs officer, but now my specific assignment will be towards the maritime industry. And I will need to hire more customs officers and more police officers because we're beefing up to be able to secure our borders and be able to do what we need to do for ourselves. So, Madam Speaker, while we talk about fees and talk about playing on the big stage, we don't just want to do so in terms of the letter of the law, but we want to be able to ensure that practical steps can be taken, evidence can be seen by our people, securing our borders and helping to build out this industry, be able to charge what we need to charge, be able to collect what we need to collect, and be able to secure the borders for which we are responsible, not just the 200 nautical miles, but in partnerships with other jurisdictions, Madam Speaker, we are able to ensure that we are building and continue to build a BVI that we can continue to be proud of. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the Territorial at-Large Member, Honorable Lorna Smith. I'm sorry, Junior Minister.
Madam Speaker, yeah, I have to remember what I said. I said I like the territorial at large representative. And is it on now? Yes? Thank you. Madam Speaker, thanks for allowing me to contribute to this debate. And I was saying that this is a very important bill, the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2025. And I was saying further that I heard a lot in terms of the bill and what it is doing, but I did not really hear the critical importance of this bill. Madam Speaker, I remember in 2008 when we attained Category 1 status. We had been working on it for a few years before. In fact, the Attorney General was in the London office at the time working on it. I was then head of BVI International Finance. And I will not forget ever the joy on Captain Babuka Salah's face when he was able to announce that we had attained Category 1 status. What did it mean for us? It meant a lot for us. It meant that the BVI, which was known and is still known as the yachting capital, not only of the Caribbean, I like to say of the world, could go further in terms of its development, in that we could register bigger boats, we could register mega yachts, we could register cargo vessels of any size and other vessels. So, Madam Speaker, in terms of the economic importance of this bill, that was the critical point for us in terms of attaining or Category 1 status. This bill before us makes sure, as the Premier said when he made his comments, it makes sure that we retain that status, that Category 1 status, that we build on it in some respects. And yes, we had an excellent meeting, an informal meeting with the professionals, the technical people from the Ministry of Finance, the Shipping Registry, and so on. And one of the points that was made by the director of the Shipping Register, the Director General of the Shipping Registry, that our mariners are bursting at the seams. We need to build more. We need to do more. This morning early, I had a meeting with one of the owners of one of our mariners, and he is ready. And Madam Speaker, this bill, together with us moving forward very quickly as a government, would take us to that level where we want to be in terms of shipping. It was only last year that the Virgin Islands Shipping Registry attained, it became a statutory body. And one of the reasons that it became that statutory body, so that it could expand without being held back by the normal bureaucratic red tape that the public service entails. And so, Madam Speaker, I was very happy that the director and his team were here. I was very happy. I was pleased that he and Miss Noni Georges, this is Mr. Samuels, and Miss Noni Georges were able to explain to us the connection between the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill and the III Code that we must attain, or we must strive to attain. Madam Speaker, as the member for the 2nd District alluded to, there are 6 international maritime organization mandatory instruments. And he mentioned them, so I don't need to read them out. But I would like to make reference to Section 173B of the bill, which refers to this code or these codes. And it says the implementation of the codes 173B, 1, a code which applies to or shall apply to Virgin Islands ships wherever they may be, or foreign ships while in Virgin Islands waters by virtue of its relation to the Safety Convention, its origin under any international or regional treaty or convention, protocol, etc., any obligations set by the Red Ensign Group, of which we are a member incidentally, or such other group or any regional community, or it being issued by any maritime administration, may be implemented in the Virgin Islands by regulations made by the governor. And I'm not going to get into that debate. All I know is that I was told this morning by the consultant that the regulations are going to come here and will be passed by an affirmative resolution. That's kind of good enough for me. It continues, regulations, the same section continues. Regulations made under subsection 1 may A, make such provisions as may be required for full implementation and giving effect to the code, and B, provide for such offenses and penalties as are allowed by section 172A6. Madam Speaker, I just want to speak to about just three areas very briefly on the III code that impact us. And those are the maritime pollution, the collision regulations, and the safety of life at sea provisions. And at section 172A, it says, this is a new section that's to be inserted in the original act. The principal act is amended by inserting the following heading and a new section after section 172. And it says, implementation of the Safety Convention and to have its force of law. 172A, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, 1974, as amended or modified by its protocols of 1978 and 1988, in brackets, the Safety Convention, shall have force of law in the Virgin Islands. And again, it makes reference to the governor making regulations for the purposes of implementing into domestic law and giving effect to the provisions of the Safety Convention, etc., which constitute an integral part of the Safety Convention. Again, Madam Speaker, I believe that this will come before this House. I mean, the regulations will come before this House for an affirmative resolution. Madam Speaker, in terms of maritime pollution, the maritime pollution, of course, there are several areas of pollution, like I believe one or two of them have been mentioned. Things like dangerous pesticides, chemicals, acids, and so on. These have to be transported by these ships, cargo ships, and so on, in a special way. There has to be the proper disposal of sewage. Plastics are banned in terms of the disposal because they pose danger to sea life. And I believe the phrase is that they are not biodegradable. And then there's air pollution, including the point made by the leader of the opposition, which we need to explore further, I hope, in relation to the British Virgin Islands and specifically cruise ships. Madam Speaker, the collision regulations simply establish what are the rules of the road, so to speak. I want to speak a little bit about the safety of life at sea, which is the most important of the convention, most important section. And significant changes are being made in respect of large cargo and commercial vessels in the Caribbean. And Madam Speaker, it is certainly very important that seafarers and passengers alike, but especially seafarers, know what these are. Madam Speaker, at 172A, which I referenced earlier, implementation of the Safety Convention, and it spells out several areas that must be developed through regulations, including its protocols, the codes relating thereto, the annex issued by the International Maritime Organization. It also makes reference to regulations made under subsection 2 may make provisions in respect of any of the following matters, and there are some 24, I believe, in the bill, 24 matters, including things like the construction of ships, the carriage of cargoes, special measures to enhance maritime safety and security, the management for the safe operation of ships, and so on. Madam Speaker, if I may look quickly at, if I may be permitted to look quickly at 415, sections 415 and 417, I'm not going to dwell on it, the Leader of the Opposition did at length, in relation to giving the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force powers over vessels wherever they are, and in BVI waters, and to investigate a possible offense. And I certainly agree with him that the offense needs to be spelled out, and we cannot be arbitrary and possibly interfering with people's human rights. At 465, Madam Speaker, 465, I believe that it repeals the need for us to have to consult with the Secretary of State for any subsidiary legislation or any amendment to the Act. It certainly is an anachronism, and it's also pretty impractical. Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to see that we have Annex 7, Schedule 7, added to the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill, and it has some 24 countries added. Certainly, again, if we are looking at being a shipping registry that is providing not just service, but that is of benefit to the British Virgin Islands economy, we must be able to have persons owning ships from most countries. Of course, right now, because we are under sanctions, we can't include Russia, but we have some 24 countries that could, of course, if they want to, register their ships in the British Virgin Islands. This is certainly very, very welcome. Madam Speaker, in closing, I want to reiterate the importance of this bill to the economy of the British Virgin Islands, not just for our safety, but for our economic development and for us in building or developing our economic status. It is important that we retain, we build on, maintain, and continue to develop our Category 1 status. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the member for the First District, Honorable Carl Dawson.
Very much, Madam Speaker. And I rise to give support to this bill. And I'm actually happy to come right after the Junior Minister because I was thinking along the same lines in the sense, Madam Speaker, that I'm glad our members look at some of the technical aspects with respect to the law, but with respect to the broader picture, I was focused on the Virgin Islands as a jurisdiction in the maritime space. And like her, I'm around long enough to know that it's been a journey, that it included, as you said, initiation of the sector, the achievement of Red Ensign, and certainly during my time at the HLAB Community College, we were engaged in delivering the STCW Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping Training. It's 2022 now, it was 1995 for quite a long time. And it was, at times, a slow pace. I would remember Captain Sala, Captain Pat, and all these people talking about the opportunities that are there. And we reached to the point where last year, I think it was 2020, 2024, we were about to pass the Virgin Islands Shipping and Maritime Authority Act. And we realized, Madam Speaker, that a lot of these things that we do, even as we look at the recent announcement about the medical school, and we have to appreciate perhaps what it could do as far as some enhancement to health services and opportunity for persons to be trained. But we realize that it's an economic activity. The reason that we are pursuing these things is because we're trying to build our economy. And activities in these areas will provide opportunities throughout the economy, whether it is in rentals, whether it is in various purchases and services and so on. These things are building our economy. It's not everything that will be, as I like to say, a home run, but there are a number of things that as we chip away and build sector by sector, we will provide opportunities for all persons, for all Virgin Islanders here, right at home in the land in which they live. So in order to do this, we had to come here to update and amend this legislation to ensure that we stay right in line as a premier maritime jurisdiction. Other members would have mentioned the 6 maritime codes that are our primary focus of ensuring that they're included in this legislation. Of course, they're related to various things such as lines, tonnage, safety at sea, pollution, and the like. But it's important for us to not only bring the legislation, but to follow through on ensuring that it is properly carried out. Because with what we are trying to build as a reputation, as a jurisdiction, is an awesome responsibility, Madam Speaker. Because we are now saying that we are at the world stage, we are saying and ensuring and codifying our commitment to these conventions and doing our part so that just as someone else can be confident that the laws, the global laws will be carried out in their jurisdiction, they need to be assured that anything registered in the Virgin Islands, that those very conventions will be adhered to. We realize too, Madam Chair, that it involves international obligations, because it means, as has been pointed out by other members, that our responsibility is not just here in the Virgin Islands waters. Once a ship is registered as a Virgin Islands ship, then it means that all responsibilities go where that ship goes. It means, as one of the members would have said, that there would have been the need, there is the need to ensure proper training, there's a need to ensure proper relationships from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, to ensure that our laws and the capacity, if needed, for all law enforcement to board ships in whatever country where the ships may lie, all those arrangements are in place. So passing the law is one thing, Madam Speaker, but there will be a lot of work left to be done, and we will have to support the Virgin Islands Shipping and Maritime Authority in whatever we can after we finish our work with respect to the bill. And I do agree with some of what the members have said before with respect to some needed changes that, as the Deputy Premier said, we cannot take a step backward as far as the things that have been delegated to us to have them taken away. That yes, being able to replace the governor and ensure that that responsibility lies with the minister or the cabinet, I think is critical for us as we look towards passing this bill. And the regulations also, Madam Speaker, as it has been indicated, will come to this House, and I think that's also a good, safe measure to ensure that the responsibility for this bill and its application lies with us here in the Virgin Islands. So, Madam Speaker, I would like us to pay attention, as we should, to do our job as far as this bill is concerned, ensuring that it is what we would want. But I would also like us to keep in mind of what we're building as a brand, as far as the Virgin Islands shipping maritime space is concerned, in order to build this economy and ensure opportunity for our people. I thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? Yes, I recognize the territorial at-large member, Honorable Ronnie Skelton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too rise to make my contribution to the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2025. Madam Speaker, while I am quite aware, because I am quite aware that the Merchant Shipping Act of 2001, my colleague, the Deputy Premier, and myself, I think he was on that side and I was sitting over here when this bill came before the House. Madam Speaker, there was quite a bit of discussion, quite a bit of informal meeting on this bill. And I don't think, based on how the original bill was implemented, it's not as simple as members think it is. I asked a simple question, Madam Speaker, to the Managing Director of the Virgin Islands Shipping Registry, and he said there will be no effect on the local shipping boats in this country. But that happened with this bill. And I don't know if the junior minister could remember when all the owners of the boats, even ferry boats, were in our poor. While I understand the importance and the benefit to what we are trying to achieve to the economy of this country, which is required, but it seemed to me like when we implement these things, we turn guns outward to capture businesses, and when we can't get those business captured, we turn the guns inwards on your own people. I don't want it to happen here with this amendment, because this amendment, Madam Speaker, while it speaks to a lot of good stuff, you know, again, the junior minister mentioned when we achieved Category 1 status. That was a big thing for us. But you notice when we made when we passed the bill to make it a statutory body, if you look at the financials, you notice that we still have a long way to go and just to break even, Madam Speaker. So we need to go far afield. You know, we need to be able to register our tankers, which, you know, get huge sums of money, container ships, all of those big stuff. You need to mega yachts, not the small ones, but the big ones. And we need to make sure that whatever we do here, it is flexible and can respond quickly to what is required and what we need to do internationally. I look at the bill, Madam Speaker, and the first thing that hit me is, I know the 2001 Act speaks to the governor in quite a lot of instances before we had the 2007 Constitution amendments. So I expect stuff like this back then, but I don't expect to see it going forward, where the governor is gazetted and making regulations and rules for a statutory corporation at this point in time. You know, I think that is not progress, and we need to stop it. I know the regulations, Madam Speaker, will be made by the authority. They will hand them to the minister, and the minister will look at them and take them to cabinet for approval and here for a affirmative resolution. But Madam Speaker, what I think is going to be a problem, we try to cut out red tape, but we introduce in red tape. I think if you want to respond to a marketplace that is very competitive, according to the managing director, extremely competitive, we have to give some group of people the authority to make a decision in order to get the business you're looking for and get it as quickly as possible. And let it be subject to a negative resolution here in the House, so we can talk about it, so they can go back and probably see if they can amend anything. But to subject it to affirmative resolution here, I think is not the right thing to do at this point in time. I may be wrong, but I doubt it. I don't think the governor should be making. I think it should be the minister with the approval of cabinet, because we all know how these things work now. We don't need to go over and reinvent the inefficient wheel, so to speak. We need to make sure that these things are done as quickly as possible, because that's why we turn it into a statutory corporation in the first instance. Madam Speaker, like this bill, and you see it with a lot of the bills that came before this House dealing with the HoA and its recommendations. That it seemed like we becoming scared of managing our own affairs, and we put in the governor in all of the things to one person, one man, to do all of these stuff. And I don't think that is the right thing to do. I think we need to stand up and manage our country in a efficient and in transparent way. Madam Speaker, one of the things that I noticed here in this bill, unlike the FSC and its regulation, the place of business, because the ships can be owned by an individual or corporation. And most people put them in corporation. And if the meetings of the board of directors of these ships or companies, they don't have to meet in a room. They could meet easily over electronic means. So that is good, because it gets stuff done quickly, unlike we here now mandating to the companies that are domiciled here to have a meeting here once a year or something like that. So I don't know if this is going to change, but this is to me that is a good thing. Madam Speaker, Clause 3 clearly states the areas and the waters and the safety certification and the Convention of Countries that the bill is trying to address. And you heard it from the technical expert that the reason we are doing this stuff so we can fill the gaps that were missing in the Merchant Shipping Act. So it is important that what we are doing here, we fill in the gaps that was left out during the formation of the 2001 Act. And Madam Speaker, all through this document is government. The governor will make regulation, and I do agree with the member, the deputy premier, that let us stop and do what our Constitution says. These subjects belongs to the ministerial subjects, and they need to be administered by ministers. Madam Speaker, I know I don't think we're going to make, I have a question mark here under section 173, 173, 4C. Regulations made under subsection 2 may make provision in respect of any of the following matters. And on C it says surveys of nuclear ships. I think we want to cover the whole ballpark, but we got to be careful we don't bite off more than we can chew. I think we should stay. Registering nuclear ships, it has its risk, and we probably need to stay away from them. Don't make it our bread and butter. Madam Speaker, a lot of us look at The implementation of the codes of conduct and stuff on the ships, things we must do. The powers to conform by this section are conferred in relations to premises in the Virgin Islands, Virgin Islands shipping, wherever it may be used. Madam Speaker, you're hearing not just from the director of the shipping registry that there is a shortage of marina in this country. And whatever we need to do, I know there are people who apply to build marinas, but they're going through some difficult times in terms of getting the necessary approval to do what needs to be done. And if we want to capture these ships, especially the big mega yachts, they need to dock up, they need to get fuel, they need to get provisions, they need to get the things that keep them here for 2 or 3 weeks while they're here. We need to not that we put in stumbling blocks in the way, but we have to try to remove the stumbling blocks so these things can be done. Once they're built, they're here. They're going to add to the economy. They're going to create jobs. They're going to do all the things that we are looking forward for this bill to accomplish here in the Virgin Islands. Madam Speaker, I note 430A because I did ask, and members before me mention it, in terms of adding the Virgin Islands police force to the bill. I don't think we can get away from doing it because they're the law enforcement body in the country, the primary law enforcement body in the country. And for a police, they say a police officer, but I think it would be a team of police officers on a ship, on the police boat. And I don't see them going in international waters to stop or a tanker or a container ship. I don't see them doing it. I see them doing it here in the harbor. And those ships don't come into this harbor. So that is, and the AG is under the section 43B. The AG is involved in all of these instances. They can't do none of these things unless they get clearance from the AG. And I note that even, I thought I missed a section, but even in section 4, it also applies to that they must get permission from the AG to do some of this stuff. If they go out there without doing this, we will be in trouble as a country. Madam Speaker, and this section 43D, has some kind of international implication. So I will have to ask the export when they come back in here. It says the restriction or exercise of maritime enforcement powers, hot pursuit. The authority of the governor is required before a law enforcement officer exercise any of these kind of stuff. So based on my remembrance when we were doing the 2001, there is a role in international relationship that a governor must play. And I don't think we could get away from that right now unless we go the independent way. But all the other things where they have the governor, to me, it's a statutory corporation, and the minister responsible should be exercising those authority. Madam Speaker, my concerns will minor in terms of the questions and how are we going to implement some of this stuff, where the resources going to come from. I know we have employed surveyors and so forth and so on, but there are other resources that are required to implement some of this stuff. We talk about pollution, and there's no doubt that I remember way back, even before I got into this house and we were building the first cruise ship pier. And I remember Honorable Bully, Warren Bully, in this house asking the very question that seemed to have a concern today. I stay from my house and I see the cruise ship smoke going towards the northeast. I know sometimes the other ship blocking it. But so that is a concern, and if this is in this law, I hope we can at least put that to rest, make our citizens a lot more comfortable that what is coming out of those tanks is either steam from the boilers, or when it's black, it's oil, it's burning oil. Whether or not these things are toxic to our people, and we need to make sure that is done, so we can give our people a comfort level. Because some day ago, I think it's a couple of weeks ago, one was really throwing out some real stuff, and I don't know whether it was good stuff or bad stuff, but it needs to be checked. So this section that deals with the environment and pollution, I think it comes in handy. And I don't know who's supposed to be doing it, Madam Speaker, because this bill is talking about not but ships docked at your port. That was ships in territorial waters, high seas, and so forth. It's something that I will have to get some clarification on. So, Madam Speaker, we are adding again in the schedule 24 new countries. But I asked for the bill, AG, the original bill, because I can't find it. This 24 is added to what number? Madam Speaker. Because it said 24 new countries are added. So therefore there were some countries that were added before, and I don't know how many. I guess I get that again in committee stage. But I thought some of these countries were on the list before, but it seemed like they're not. So, Madam Speaker, I think with those few words and the assurances that these new regulations will not have a detrimental effect on our local shipping thing. We used to have about 5 or 6 ships plying between Puerto Rico here and Long Island. Now we only have about 2 or 3. We're getting down to 0, Madam Speaker, and I am concerned because it seems like we are making laws to attract big business, but we're losing small business locally. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the member for the 8th District, Honorable Marlon Penn. I recognize the Minister for Health and Social Development, Honorable Vincent Whitley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the member for yielding. I thought I was the last to go. So, Madam Speaker, I will be brief. Madam Speaker, in listening to all the presentations, which were excellent, I still don't really get the feeling that persons listening, and I saw like 86 online earlier, really are connecting what we are doing in here with what's on the ground out there. So, Madam Speaker, let me put it in perspective. The command of the sea, Madam Speaker, is where the true power comes from. And it's been historically proven. Those who control the waterways control the wealth, control the power. And this has been proven over hundreds of years. Madam Speaker, the first major explorers in the Western Hemisphere were the Spanish, through Christopher Columbus. They came later. And Madam Speaker, then the Portuguese. And those two realizing there was going to be a conflict in the power. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI brought together two papal bulls to create what was called in 1494 the Treaty of Tordesillas. And what that treaty did, it gave Spain the Western Hemisphere, this land went from the North Pole to the South Pole. And it told Spain, anything to the west is yours. Portugal, anything to the east is yours, just to avoid conflict. And for the next 400 to 500 years, no nation controlled the wealth in the ocean that were not a seafaring nation. From Spain, Portugal, Amsterdam, the UK. It wasn't until the 1900s that changed up. In America have both coasts, West Coast and East Coast. And that's why today you see Trump making about Greenland. It's about control of the waterways. It's as real as anything else. And these legislations here fit right in to our self-determination, because it is taking control to build wealth for your territory. So that Greenland thing, he ain't Trump playing no idiot. He realized exactly that if you don't control that Arctic up there, if America don't control it, and he's right, it affects the whole world stability. And the Chinese and the Russians up there. And Trump is saying, wait a minute, I want peace of this action. Matter of fact, I want the whole thing. It's about controlling waterways. Because, Madam Speaker, 90% of the world goods, cargo, I want to see 90%. About how much tons of cargo moves over the oceans every year. Of course, a lot ends up in the ocean. And that's why this is so important. The International Maritime Organization, really from the brief we had earlier, IMO, is a specialized agency of the United Nations which aims to ensure safe, secure, and efficient shipping on clean oceans. Established in 1948, IMO's main role is to create a regulatory framework for the shipping industry that is fair and effective, universally implemented, and that promotes safe, secure, environmentally sound, efficient, and sustainable shipping. And I speak of recent research 10 years ago as to how many containers annually fall off ships and end up in the ocean. You'll be surprised how many hundreds of thousands of containers fall in the ocean containing all sort of stuff. And I think the BVI has 200 nautical miles of water. However, the benefits for such a regulatory framework can only be fully achieved when all member states carry out the obligations that are required by the instruments to which they are parties. Madam Speaker, that key word there, all, is critical, because all the oceans are connected. So what happens in one can very well affect what happens some places. Madam Speaker, I went to a little lecture on Sunday in Virgin. I had a scientist, I guess, was demonstrating microplastics around the BVI. She had a couple of places. But she brought a small container of what appeared to be sand off a beach. And in front of us, she poured the container of sand into a bowl of salt water. I was shocked to see how many things started to float and how many things sank. The sand itself is full of microplastics and all these different things. Where they came from? Out of the ocean, out of our ocean. Basically, we have 200 nautical miles. And if we're going to mature as the nation, we must take control and demonstrate capacity to monitor and safeguard all 200 nautical miles. Madam Speaker, 6 international conventions were selected by the MOU members for use by the other scheme. These are known as the mandatory instruments. That's what I want to call them out. You know why I want to call them out? Because I don't think our people realize some of the things we are involved with. Yes, we are a small dot on the map, Madam Speaker, but we are also international players. And when you want to be an international player, you have to abide by international standards, which can be fair. If 2 men go on a shop and a poor man to buy a cake, then both of them paying the same price. The poor man's really, really high. So these are not cheap to implement. And we have to do the same thing as little islands as the big nations have to do. The load lines. It's the International Convention on Load Lines, 1966, and Protocol of 1998. Tonnage. International Convention on Tonnage, Measurement of Ships, 1969. International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Seafarers, STCW, as amended, including the 1995 and 2010 Manila Amendments. International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, 1973, as modified by the Protocol of 1978, relating thereto, and by the Protocol of 1997, MARPOL. Convention on International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea. As well as not only collisions, we've seen Exxon Valdez big oil leak. We've seen cruise ships on the ground on the Pacific World. In our own little territory here, we have the Pacific 3 that landed a bunch of lead over on Carrot Rock. That's right here in the BVI. Convention on International Regulation Prevented, well, do that. International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, 1974, and as amended. The III Code is a document setting on standards against which member states are measured to determine a comprehensive and objective assessment of how effectively they are administering and implementing the mandatory IMO instruments. Madam Speaker, it's a job we have to do. It's something we should do. We should not hand it over to anybody. So I want to commend the Premier for bringing the Motion Shipping Act. It's a bold move. It's a very bold move because for too long we've just sat down and assumed somebody's going to patrol our waters for us. Somebody's going to tell us this, somebody's going to tell us that. It's time, Madam Speaker, for us to come up to the plate and start doing what we know we have to do. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be cheap. Will there be errors? Of course. The ones who were in control didn't get there overnight. It took them years of trial and error to know where they feel where they can dictate. I think I'm going to go through one section of this here because I tend to agree with the member for the 6 powers of arrest and seizure, where it says in 430G, number 2A, it refers to arrest without warrant anyone whom the officer has reasonable grounds for suspecting to be guilty of the offense, and seize and retain anything found on a ship which appears to the officer to be evidence of the offense other than anything that the officer has reasonable grounds to believe to be an item subject to legal privilege. Madam Speaker, it's a loaded, now you see why it will scare someone. Because if they knew improperly controlled, it could cause a lot of mischief. When I read that there, this reminded me of my friend who has some oil ships up in the Gulf of Hamas, with the little Somalis come out there in a speedboat to create mischief for those ships that were sailing across. So, Madam Speaker, I think we're moving in the right direction. Once we put a few things in place, I think it's a very good move. It is showing maturity as a territory. We are willing at this point in time to take the bold steps. So I can really commend the Premier and his team for bringing this forward at this time. Madam Speaker, with those few words here, I will take my seat.
Thank you. I recognize the member for the 8th District, Honorable Marlon Penn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to make my contribution
on the bill before us, the Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2025. And Speaker, I'm glad I gave the member from the Far East an opportunity to speak. I think he gave the public a nice history lesson on maritime history, back all the way to the 1900s, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too would like to offer my brief contribution to the bill. Madam Speaker, I think the members before touch on some of the key components. I think that a couple of clauses that I want to emphasize as well and express my concern on the way forward, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, like all the other international business, the shipping registry business is no different. It's no different than the financial services business that we administer. In fact, at one point, it was housed within the Financial Services Commission, and I had the privilege to work aside at the time, working to help him put his systems in place. Mr. Babuka Salah, Captain Salah, who worked diligently to build the framework, in our blessed memory, Ronald Donovan from Carrot Bay, both of whom who worked collaboratively to work to build the frameworks and all the legislative pieces that underpin this industry. And I want to publicly acknowledge Captain Salah for the work he has done. I know that he's gone beyond that as well. I know the former Deputy Premier, Junior Minister for Financial Services, mentioned his work to get Category 1 status in the time in which he did. But I know many young persons in this territory he encouraged, mentored, worked with to get licenses to be able to sail some of the major vessels, big vessels around this territory, and even work internationally. I myself have a young nephew who just recently graduated from a school in Florida and attained his license, and now he's going to put the hours in to get his official his license. But it speaks to the potential in the industry. We've been talking about this for decades in terms of where we want to take this industry. In 2021, we came to this house to take the next step to move the shipping registry into a statutory organization, to be able to have the flexibility, have the agility to make certain decisions when you're dealing with international business on the national stage. So I think we're here today, and we know, and it was explained to us earlier, the audit that was done, where the shipping registry at the time, Maritime Authority, failed based on not demonstrating the ability to have in law the six, adhering to the 6 conventions that is outlined in the brief that we were given earlier today. And we're here to ensure that they adhere to those conventions. And I expressed, Madam Speaker, during that discussion, the 2 areas of concerns for me. When we did the mutual evaluation, one of the biggest things is that, not that we didn't have the laws in place, that we didn't demonstrate the capacity to execute the laws on the ground and ensure that we have the level of enforcement capability and capacity. And I asked then the managing director if he indeed believes that his team has the ability now to implement. He said yes. And I'm hoping that indeed is yes, because I think that's going to be the critical component, as was mentioned earlier by one of the members, I can't recall, the ability to enforce, the ability to ensure that we adhere to the treaties and the conventions that we're now attempting to sign on in this piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the point that was raised, I think the first one raised was the Deputy Premier about the issue about ensuring that we maintain a level, we don't have a regression in terms of the authority that we've attained. I know under financial services, Madam AG, there's a level of entrustment that we have, particularly to deal with financial services matters, international business matters. We had that when we were dealing with the tiers. We negotiated them on our own, and we had the ability to go and negotiate the tiers and different things that are related with the international authorities that work within this space of international business.
And I don't know, AG, if the team has assessed that and if it's also true for the shipping registry space, if that same level of entrustment appertains as relates to the maritime industry. That's one of the things that we'll have to discuss when we go into the committee stages to ensure that that same level of entrustment applies to the maritime space. Madam Speaker, the question about powers of enforcement under 430A, where it outlines the power of enforcement and the power of the authority is the police. I think we all are in the agreement that the police has the overarching responsibility for crime and law enforcement in the territory. And I think that it's the leader of the opposition who made the point about ensuring that the capacity is at a senior level. I know we went through the Police Act and various subsequent acts to the Police Act, where we had a level of consistency in terms of the change that were made, and I see it being no different in this piece of legislation. My concern, though, Madam Speaker, because the intention, the understanding initially was that this would apply just to those vessels, international vessels, that attain Category 1. When you read the provision, it doesn't seem so. It seems like it applies to maritime policing in general. So that means it impacts our local boaters as well in terms of maritime policing. So the powers that are conferred on them also impact our local population as well. We've all heard the stories of persons boarding individuals' boat without due process, without due cause. We're hearing boats are being seized. In fact, there was a situation where a boat was seized and it cost the territory some $500,000+ because due process wasn't adhered to. They were sued, and the government of the day had to pay a hefty fine in the courts because of not adhering to due process. So I ensure that what we're doing now is we're setting the framework for maritime policing, Honorable Premier. And we have to ensure that due process is adhered to. I agree with the members before me who spoke, to ensure that the same level of due care that we placed in the other previous act, the Police Act, the Drug Trafficking Offensive Act, and other acts, is consistent, particularly in the maritime space as it relates to maritime policing. So I support those notions that were raised previously, and I look forward to us having those discussions, particularly in the committee stages, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, additionally, under 430D, in terms of hot pursuit, Madam Speaker, I know that there's a memorandum of understanding between, let me see if I could find it, Madam Speaker, between the United States of America and the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and North America, as it relates to the ship rider agreement between us in this region, and particularly all the overseas territories. Madam Speaker, I don't know how this appertains in terms of the agreement that was, MOU that was signed between the UK and the US, in the US territory, United States of America. We have to adhere to these treaties that have been signed by our international counterparts, particularly the UK. So I don't know I don't see anything in this particular amendment or in the act that speaks to this, Madam Speaker. I think in the committee stage, we need to really ensure that we're not creating any imbalance between the MOU that was signed between the UK and the United States in terms of what we are attempting to do or attempting to do in this piece of legislation. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm eager for us to really give the shipping registry and the Maritime Authority the tools that they need to go out and solicit the business that they need. But I agree that we have to ensure that while we're fulfilling international obligations, we're not adversely affecting our local businesses and our local operations in the maritime space. I agree the convention that speaks to the level of pollutants in the water, particularly the ones that speaks to the emission of sewage and other harmful chemicals in the water. We have a large boating community in the territory. We've been talking for decades about ensuring there's a level of requirement on a local level Because most of those boats are not registered in BVI. They have an international obligation in terms of their registration. And we have to ensure that they adhere to, and we have not put the framework permit. We have to see how these international conventions, if they applies to these boats that we're about to debate in a few weeks or in the coming month, particularly the cruise permit, I think the bill that speaks to the, yes, there's the commercial recreation vessel licenses, and those vessels that come into our territory. Do these conventions apply to these vessels? And how do we ensure that if the environmental impact or the implication of these vessels being in our water, now that we're signed up to these conventions, how do we apply to these subsequent pieces of legislations? Those are things that we have to consider. And if it does not, we have to ensure that we put the pieces in place in our own legislation to ensure that we protect our environment. We as a territory, no one comes to our rescue in the billions or the hundreds and tens of $millions to put money into the protection of the environment. The member raised a point where we had a mega yacht that struck Carrot Rock, and there were some pellets that were thought to be extremely hazardous to the environment and to the marine life around Carrot Rock in that side of the Virgin Islands. And I think it cost us a tremendous amount of money to get that. It was a battle back and forth with insurance and who was responsible, who was not responsible. I don't know if they eventually paid, but I think we had to eventually cough up the money to get those pellets retrieved from the surface of the marine environment. So those are things we have to be cognizant of. We have these international obligations that we're signing up for. We have to ensure that in the event that anything does happen in our waters, that we have the wherewithal to ensure that the level of protection for our marine environment is adhered to due to these international conventions. But I'm eager, Madam Speaker, because we've been hearing for the longest time that the maritime space is where we're going to get the revenues to supplement a lot of the economic shortfall that we're seeing. But as to date, I think they only break even as best, and there's still some level of subsidy that the government of the day continues to offer to the maritime space. I believe once we've done our part to ensure that the level of the pieces are in place to reattain Category 1 certification, and then we can ensure that they have the tools to fly and do what they need to do to bring in the revenue. Our counterparts like Cayman and others are really way above and beyond what we are right now. And we need to get ourselves in the game and give the level of support that substantive government has been giving it to the maritime space. We now have given them the ability to have their independence to really make the decisions that they need to make moving forward. So, Madam Speaker, I wouldn't reiterate many of the things that were said already, but just to say that I think we had a decent understanding in the informal committee stages, but the debate has brought some additional uncertainty in terms of the direction. I know when the experts come here in a few minutes, it'll give us a little more clarity to ensure that we do not infringe on the civil liberties, as they tend to call it, of individuals operating within the space. I heard the interterritorial member made the point about the number of local vessels who normally would have been registered in this space are dwindling. They're operating, but they tend to now operate inward, into Ireland. They've not registered, in fact, to operate like they used to in the Puerto Ricos, down island in the region. And that's a concern, Madam Speaker. Especially as we discuss the concerns regarding food security, concerns in terms of the shipping costs that we're seeing happening within the international and geopolitical issues that are being discussed, Madam Speaker. We have to figure out what is the issue with a lot of local vessels that typically they used to operate in that space that are not operating anymore, and how can we ensure that we have a proper conversation, particularly if we're discussing relationships with our Caribbean partners, to ensure that we could have a reliable source of transportation in terms of goods between the Trinidad, the Dominican Republics, and other areas that produce, particularly food, and make sure that our providers, our seamen, so to speak, are in the game as it relates to this. And this, what we're doing today does not adversely impact the way that they operate their businesses. So I'll take my seat, Madam Speaker, and I look forward to the conversation in the committee stage.
Thank you. I call upon the Premier to wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I won't be long. I'll just say just a few things in summary. We've had a full and robust debate, and I want to thank all the members for contributing. I'll just begin my short little wrap up around the area where the member for the 8th district ended. In speaking about our aspirations for building our shipping registry and the benefits that will accrue to the territory in doing so. We mentioned our financial services business, and of course the fact that we have a corporate registry of between 350,000 and 400,000 companies, and the opportunities to build in a shipping registry by being able to register the ships similar to registering companies on our register, and even the opportunity to be able to provide a one-stop shop in having persons, have company formations for these vessels right here in the Virgin Islands, as well as them being flagged BVI, that type of potential. So the work that we're doing here is to ultimately to build a viable shipping registry, like the member for the 8th said, in the region, Cayman Islands, Antigua, places like that. They are ahead of us, and certainly we have to do some work to be able to catch up. And some of what we have been doing is in efforts of doing so, including changing the shipping registry into a statutory authority, as well as, of course, ensuring that we comply with the requirements of the III code. We have an important audit coming up in December, and the changes we are making to the Merchant Shipping Act are key in being able to perform well in this audit so that we can retain our Category 1 status and to be able to register these big vessels, which is big business for the territory. So this is what we are attempting to do. Of course, our members would have made very valuable contributions to this debate. A number of members commenting on the role of the governor in the legislation. And the Deputy Premier started us off there, ensuring that areas which are devolved to the elected government, that we ensure that we retain those areas. And of course, other important points were brought up in terms of what constitutes a law enforcement officer, and of course, whether customs and even immigration is being left out of that particular discussion. So, Madam Speaker, what I would say is that we should engage very fully with the witnesses. We have Mrs. Noni Georges, who the Attorney General's Chambers has engaged to assist, along with a team of 5 drafters, in bringing our maritime legislation up to speed. They have done a tremendous amount of research. They have studied these international treaties, what is required to be able to comply with those. They have studied, of course, our own constitution. They have studied the context, and they've put forward a proposal that they believe will help us to comply. Of course, we as legislators have a responsibility to ensure we safeguard the best interests of the people of the Virgin Islands. So it's important for us to, in some instances, challenge, problematize, engage, test and pull, test any assumptions, and see if through that exchange we can come up with the best product possible for our people, knowing what it is we're seeking to achieve. So having said that, Madam Speaker, I would say that we should go into committee and have a very full and robust discussion with the witnesses, challenge some of the assumptions, push as hard as we can to ensure that what we are doing is fit for purpose in being able to comply with the code, but also to ensure that we don't set ourselves back in any way. So again, Madam Speaker, I thank the members for the very robust contribution to this debate, and I'm looking forward to going to this amendment bill clause by clause. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2025 be now read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I call upon the clerk to read the bill a second time.
This bill may be cited as Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2025.
Pursuant to Standing Order 55-1 of the House of Assembly of the Virgin Islands, the bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to consider it clause by clause. House is now in committee.